Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is for our softball coaches. We have a softball update from the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union. This is Tom Florian with the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union. I'm joined today by our panelists, Executive Director of the Girls Union, Jean Berger, Assistant Director, Jason Esslinger, Associate Director, Gary Ross, and Coordinator of Officials, Kathy Creighton. And at this time, I will pass it along to Jean to begin today's presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I make note that today is Friday, May 29th. So we have 2 days, right? 2 days to June 1st when practice begins. I know that there is a lot of things that happened and some of you really wondered if we will ever get here, and we're here. So the purpose of today really is to go over the Department of Education and the public health guidance and give you some insight into those. We're going to go over to some specific question and answers about eligibility, screening and testing, social distancing, and we have a whole section on our umpires. There is a feature at the bottom through question and answers. If you would put your questions in there, we are going to attempt to answer those live. We'll read them, we'll put in answers. The chat feature is really not for questions. You can utilize it if you want, but it's really more for you to communicate with the coaches. So if you have a question you want us to answer, please use the Q&A feature. Just so you know, once this is over, we'll have other open-ended questions and we can review anything in detail. We have about 90 minutes. Yesterday with the ADs, we got through 121 questions. So hopefully we're not going to have that many today. This Zoom meeting is recorded and we're going to provide a link later. We'll also provide a transcript of the Q&As that were asked. We may go back and add some details to the answers as we review them and talk about them. But all of that will be posted on our web. So if you want to go and review the Zoom later or look at the answers to the questions if you missed something. And as you've heard me say before, maybe, the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. So if there's something we can help you with, please get a hold of someone or ask a question. This is very fluid. We know that every couple of weeks things change. The governor gives different proclamations. So we'll keep updating and we'll keep answering as best we can. But before we get started, I'd just like to say good luck and please be safe and do all that you can during this upcoming summer softball season. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to also say what Jean said and welcome. I'm going to go over some of the Department of Education overviews. We'll start with practice first. And as Jean said, everyone knows we're starting practice on June 1st. Sounds like some of you are starting early on June 1st. But again, that's when we're going to be starting up signage. One of the things that the Department of Health has told us is make sure we have lots of signage. And we've put a lot of signs in place that we sent, we've got on our website as far as what to do and what not to do, just a various amount of signs that are on our website. We hope you post them. I know some schools have developed their own. They're welcome to do that as well. Also, dugouts during the practice period. No dugouts, we're not allowed to use dugouts, so everyone should line up their equipment 6 feet apart along the fence lines. Also parents. No parents at practice. They can drop their kids off. They can remain in their cars while practice is going on, but we don't want them at practice and on the field. And obviously equipment, players need to utilize their own equipment as much as possible. Coaches need to ensure social distancing between players as much as possible. And that's going to be kind of the tricky part as we get started here is, you know, where you're all used to doing drills, doing them a certain way. What we want to make sure you do is like when everyone is, there's proper distance between players, whether it's, you know, waiting for batting practice or watching drills, having players spread out a little bit. Make sure you do that. Water, facilities, and food. Players need to bring their own. Parents should not provide food for the whole team. That's very important to start off. Sanitizing equipment. Coaches need to sanitize shared equipment before and after each practice. Also, a big habit to get into, make sure players provide their own sanitizer. If you can help not having a big tub of sanitizer, make sure everyone carries their own. That's really important. And also sunflower seeds. Again, this is kind of all about droplets. We don't want to have basically spitting is what it turns out to. I've got a 14-year-old that he's got a bad habit of that too, and I've been working with him. But yeah, just no spitting, no sunflower seeds at this time. Temperature check before practice. Make sure coaches and players, practice personnel such as trainers, make sure you take your temperature before you step out on that field. There's going to be different protocols that people will use. You can take your temperature at home. Basically any temperature over 100.3 degrees, you should not be coming to practice. And again, schools can develop their own protocol, and they probably are developing their own protocol as far as how they decide to do that, but just make sure that temperatures are taken before practice begins. Anyone exhibiting symptoms should not attend practice. They need to remain fever-free for 24 hours to return if no symptoms or no other symptoms for COVID-19 are present. What we recommend is possibly coaches or ADs visiting with the school nurse or medical profession about each player's pre-existing conditions. There may be some people on your team that are at higher risk for COVID-19. So make sure you know about that and make sure you visit with them on how to take additional precautions if you need to do that. Coaches also need to track absences for potential COVID-19. And what we want you to do there is, if you've got kids that aren't showing up for practice, just follow up. Make sure you find out why they're not coming so we know that there isn't any potential case out there. All right, so big question. If there is a positive case of COVID-19, make sure your local public health is reported. Be proactive on this. What we maybe would recommend is, and we recommended to ADs, was contacting your local public health service and get a plan, have possibly a plan in place, and say if you did have someone that had COVID-19, how would you handle that? We've provided a link for local local public health agencies for you to look at. And again, this meeting is being recorded, so you don't need to furiously write this down, but it'll be on our website later. And again, like Jean said, this is a fluid thing. We're getting information all the time. We got information yesterday that what we weren't able to present to the ADs. So there's going to be a lot of things. If you think about it, a lot has happened in the last 2 weeks. So there may be different protocols when symptoms and positive tests are present. So just if we find out about it, we're going to let you. Anything new, we'll be sure to let you know as well. Now we're at game time, June 15th. Competitions can start. Again, we have signage for what to do on game days out on our website for you to download. Again, I know some of you may use your own. Once games start, the use of dugouts are permitted for games. Again, make sure you practice social distancing outside of the dugouts and the fence toward the foul pole would be the best practice. Again, players, make sure the players use their own equipment and their own towels. Again, same thing with water and food source. Make sure each player brings their own water. Make sure they bring their own food. And again, be cognizant of that because during Iowa heat, you're going to need a lot of water. So make sure your players are aware of that as well. And coaches, again, you need to sanitize any shared equipment before your game and after your game. Again, during games, players and coaches, essential personnel, you need to take your temperatures before each game. Again, if you're showing any kind of COVID symptoms, you're not allowed to participate. As far as bleachers for fans, this is a big question. How to limit the use of bleachers. We are encouraging everyone to use their own chairs when they come to games. As far as fans, personally, I think the best practice to handle this is also kind of like what the restaurants are doing and other facilities and businesses, and that's utilizing your bleachers at possibly 50%. Having your family sit together and spread out from other families on the bleachers. Again, fans displaying symptoms are not allowed into the facility. Make sure you're practicing your social distancing between your households, your personal responsibility for following public health guidelines. we don't necessarily want you to be the social distancing police. We want you to, Tom Keating said it best yesterday, sort of the recommenders. And that is, you know, if you may have some fans that might need some gentle reminders just to maybe have a little more space and having to deal with that. And again, those are things that I think probably your athletic administrators will talk about as well. Department of Education, schools can implement any other reasonable measures under the circumstances of each school to ensure social distancing of staff, students, and community members. So, and even increased hygiene practices and other public health measures to reduce the risk. So if there's you can actually, we're giving you guidelines, you can make stricter guidelines. I know we have some schools that are doing that as far as making the public wear masks. So you have some flexibility, and like I said, you can be more strict. No concession stands at the school-owned facilities. And again, if there's a positive case, make sure that you contact public health.
Yesterday, the Department of Education, yesterday afternoon, submitted some guidelines for transportation. And some of these are more for the administration and or transportation department to communicate and handle. But some of these obviously were areas of which you can be a big part. Same thing in terms of what Jason had mentioned regarding your temperature. They should not get on the bus if they have over 100.3 coaches or players. Again, the normal screening that you're going to do for symptoms fits into the same guidelines for transportation. And if they're sick or ill, you know, they should not be riding the bus as well. You know, one of the things, as you know, with your bus drivers, many of them are vulnerable to COVID-19, and they have the same guidelines as far as if they have symptoms or ill or have the temperature, they should not be driving the bus. A couple of key things there that will be communicated to the drivers when loading or unloading the bus. The driver should be the last one onto the bus and the first one off, obviously making sure that the engine's not running and they have the keys. And a couple things that you can be aware of as you're loading the bus is have the students begin loading to the rear of the bus and then unloading at the beginning of the bus. And as we all know, the athletes get excited and want to get up and get out quickly, but if they can be patient and make sure they have enough social distancing when they leave and kind of get up and stay apart, that would be appreciated. And I think another thing that's there regarding the use of the seats is do not have anyone sit directly behind the bus driver. You know, some of the things that you can do here and I guess your transportation department probably will take care of is ensuring that the interior of the bus has been cleaned and disinfected. Pay particular attention to the high touch surface areas, the rails, seats, seat belts, if they have them. They should make sure that it's been inspected and appropriate to be able to be used for transportation reasons. Some of the things that the transportation departments would do would be to provide training to the transportation staff so they understand how to effectively clean the bus, the vehicle. One thing that you can very much do during trips, increase the circulation of the outdoor air, open those windows so there is fresh air coming into the buses. And again, don't allow open drink or food in the bus at any time. And then as in all phases, encourage hand washing or use of hand sanitizer prior to boarding the bus. The transportation guidelines yesterday talked about in terms of recommendation. And if you look at a 77 passenger, and if you would put one in a seat and alternating seats on each side, it allows up to a passenger of 13. Now, obviously, if that doesn't fit into your guidelines, it's not a requirement, but these are some practices that you could do to reduce the likelihood of spreading, such as using face coverings. But again, alternating rows and then having the in-between on the opposite side would be appropriate. Allow siblings from the same household to sit together in the same seat. That's something you can do. And another key thing is whichever seat that the girls or coaches sat on the way to the game, have them sit in the same seat on the way home. Alternating transportation arrangements. I know this is a lot of what school districts have asked about. And again, many have policies already that allow your athletes to go home with parents or to ride with parents. So if that's something you as a school district allow, you can sure do that from the state standpoint.
Sorry, I was answering questions. So when we got the clearance from the governor to that it was permitted for us to have sports and we need to make the decision, Tom Keating and I spent some time with the Iowa Department of Public Health online, social distance, and we got to talk to Dr. Padati. And I think she said some things that I'm going to pass along that made really good common sense to us. So think about this. The virus is primarily transmitted through droplets after prolonged contact closer than 6 feet. You know, when it first came out, I took my mail into the garage and didn't touch it, and I was wiping down my Amazon packages, and we thought if we walked by someone, we could catch it in the air, and now we know more about this. Prolonged contact can be defined as long as 30 minutes, depending. Each county public health department should be giving you the prolonged contact. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 15, up to 30. It kind of depends on where the virus is and how active it is in your county. But remember, this prolonged contact is something to keep in mind. It isn't a matter of you just touch someone, your risk of getting it is very, very low. Frequent hand washing and sanitizing and social distancing are the best ways to combat this, okay? We know now that if it's on your hands and you touch your face, you spread it. That's how it's transmitted primarily. So these are behavior changes for ball players that we're gonna have to change. That this is something coaches are gonna have to pay attention to and be very diligent about it. And it's hard, I know it's hard, but when you think about these are the things that you can do to lower the risk every day, all the time, it gives you some guidelines. So I wanted to share those just so it gives you some point of reference from what the public health is talking about. You know, if you saw the NFHS stuff, there was a lot of things about face covering and recommendation for masks. And they're, of course, permissible, and anyone can wear them. Some of the things that Dr. Padati talked about in relationship to masks. They create a false sense of security, right? If we have a mask on, we don't have to social distance. That's not true. If we have a mask on, we don't have to wash our hands. That's not true, okay? Masks tend to encourage touching of our faces, okay? You have a mask on, you touch your face. And when they're touched, they're less effective. And if you don't put them on and you don't wear them, they're less effective. And remember, we're talking about heat and humidity in the Iowa summer. So while it's perfectly acceptable, masks do not replace hand washing, social distancing, not touching your face, okay? So each district now has a decision to make, and they need to let us know if they're going to play softball by June 8th, okay? But we are asking that the home team have the proper administrative supervision there, or a site manager, okay? It doesn't have to be a principal, doesn't have to be an AD, it has to be a knowledgeable adult. And this is not the head coach. I know that head coaches are the administrative point for a lot of places, but not this year. You cannot be watching and doing all that we've asked you to do, then make a decision on where to send somebody when there's a tornado coming. What are you gonna do if somebody isn't social distancing? No, we need an on-site supervisor to ensure compliance with some of these guidelines, because the governor, Department of Education, and the Department of Public Health have ordered these in order to play. So each district's going to have a supervisor. Clear enough? Because if the umpires don't have one, they maybe won't play. Okay, because they may decide it's not safe. So we've got to have that on-site supervisor. Schools are allowed to have stricter guidelines. If you want to require masks for everybody who comes, that's fine. We're not saying you can't. We are giving guidelines, but districts need to make their own decisions on some of these things based on their location and what they feel is best for their community.
And Jean, this is Tom Florian here. I was sitting on the baseball meeting this morning as well. I do want to clarify that the home team cannot then require the visiting team to wear masks. Is that correct?
Correct, right. And you can't require umpires to wear masks. You can do what you need to do for your people.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Yep, thanks, Tom.
Sorry about that, was answering a question. Who will be responsible for canceling our softball season, either from a school standpoint or a state standpoint? As Jean had mentioned, things are changing on a regular basis. And so the local school district can make the determination to cancel their season at any time. In addition, if county or state departments deem it necessary, they as well could cancel the softball or baseball season. You know, as we talked earlier about an important aspect for players, coaches, and spectators is washing hands. Individuals should wash their hands for a minimum of 20 seconds with warm water and soap before touching any surfaces. Can't overdo that. Players and coaches are encouraged to bring sanitary wipes and to use them after contact with any shared equipment. And a critical thing, I know that majority of the people in the past typically wouldn't shower at school, but they're encouraged to shower and wash your clothing immediately upon returning to home after practice and after games. You know, a big question is, you know, what would practices or what should they look like? And we looked at guidance from the Department of Education and Department of Health. A key thing is during practices, no dugouts are to be used. Players' items should be lined up against the fence and spread out at least 6 feet apart. And again, that's one of the responsibilities in getting our athletes trained. Coaches are responsible for ensuring social distance is maintained between players as much as possible. You know, and there's various ways, as you know, that this can be done, such as when they're playing catch, spreading out, changing drills so the players remain spaced out, and no congregating of players waiting to bat. It's as anything, the new normal is different. And so the athletes and coaches will need to adjust. The Sports Medicine Guideline Advisory Committee had made some recommendations. We had listened to the NFHS last week or a week before, and they suggested workouts should be conducted in pods of students with the same 5 to 10 students always working out together. Again, this isn't a requirement. This is just a recommendation to help ensure more social distancing and less contact between the athletes. For social distancing guidelines during games, where should additional players be placed in the dugout? And I know a couple of the questions have said, due to your limitation of your size of your dugout and your seating, it's going to be very, very difficult. But per guidelines, use of the dugouts are permitted during games only. Players should spread out as much as possible unless they're actively participating in the game. And again, this is where the rules allow for dugouts, media areas to be extended down the foul lines outside of the playing area. In addition, you could bring in some bleachers to put it behind your dugout to use for your JV or your other athletes. And again, the key is you may have to make some adjustments in what your fans, where they sit. They're used to sitting in an area, but you may need to make some adjustments for them to accommodate your athletes during the game. As to who will be allowed in the dugout, and one of the things that between the baseball and softball, identified essential personnel. They're the only ones that are allowed on the field to play. And these are defined as the players, coaches, trainers, and umpires. And I know all of you and many of you use, in the past, have used bat girls or bat boys, managers, statisticians, etc. These are deemed as non-essential personnel, and they're not to be in the dugout or extended dugout area. Now, does that mean that your statistician can't be just outside your dugout? Yes, they can. The intent is not to make it impossible for you to communicate with them, but the intent is to minimize the number of essential people that are in the dugout. The other little aspect that you maybe have seen is practices. No spectators or media are allowed to watch practices. And that's the guidelines from the Department of Education and the Department of Health. Now, you might say if the athlete can't drive themselves, you know, what are the parents supposed to do? Well, they either need to drop them off and leave, or the parents need to drop them off and stay in their car. But no additional people beyond your practice groups are allowed to be at practices these first 2 weeks. And again, that includes media. And typically you as coaches are the first people to be contacted by the media to interview or something there. But as a reminder, we're trying to minimize the number of individuals and make sure that everybody that is in the practice area has been properly checked for temperatures, etc. A question I know that Kathy is going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about the interaction of coaches and umpires. So I'll let her handle that. But the key is coaches should consider social distancing guidelines 6 feet when interacting with an umpire or any other individual on the field. But Kathy will expand on that when she gets to the section dealing with umpires. Question had been is, will there be any limitations on roster size during the regular season or the postseason? And no, there will be no changes regarding the roster size. But again, reminder about who is considered essential and not essential people. That is the key to who would be considered in the dugout. A question would also come is, if I as a coach need to go to the pitcher's mound, have a conference, who all would be involved? And I think based on the guidance from the DE is, as much as possible, limit the number of people that really need to be there. And it's not changing, what you need to do to communicate, but it's very much taking into account using social distancing guidelines and really limiting the number of people that are really critical to that conference. How should the pregame meeting and lineup cards, those parts, Kathy will come in more detail regarding the aspect dealing with umpires. The D part, should teams exchange handshakes after the contest? And this is very important part, that the new normal is not like what it's been. And I mean, you can think of after a home run how the athletes have gathered, or right before they're ready to go on defense. A lot of times the infielders gather, the outfielder gathers, and they touch their gloves, or many of those things after the game, shaking hands. Those are not going to be able to occur anymore. And so teams shall not exchange handshakes following the contest. And I think that's an important thing I would suggest would be for coaches to touch base and say, hey, what do we want to do after the game, since we're not going to shake hands? And it might be as simple as lining up across and tipping your hat, or thumbs up, or something like that. But that would be something for you to kind of discuss and come up with some new guidelines to avoid that handshake after contests. This is something the AEs spent a lot of time yesterday, and it really is not going to be something you as a person need to be concerned about. The administration take care of, but as long as social distancing guidelines are being followed, the local school district will determine the maximum capacity of your facility. And again, different facilities are different. They're structured differently. There's more areas in the outfield and down the foul poles and foul lines than others. And so really it becomes local decision on that. Personnel in the press box, again, the same thing. Press boxes are different size. You have different responsibilities in your press box. But the important thing is consider social distancing and guidelines. You may need to make some adjustments on where your announcer and or your scorekeeper is located to accommodate that. But again, school districts will need to determine that.
All right, we'll go to practice and game protocols. Our face coverings required to be worn by players, coaches, umpires, and spectators. The Department of Public Health and the Department of Education have said that the face coverings aren't required for players, umpires, coaches, and spectators. If an individual wants to wear a face mask, they can certainly do so. However, we do recommend that if it's worn, players and coaches that wear it, they wear a mask that's a solid color. Pitchers, obviously, we don't want an optic yellow face covering. Otherwise, there's no prohibition on the color of the mask. It's optional for spectators, workers, and others to wear masks, but they are expected to follow the social distancing guidelines. Who's responsible for providing hand sanitizer and wipes? Again, guidelines provided by the Department of Ed states players are encouraged to provide their own hand sanitizer and their own wipes. We want them to get used to carrying their own hand sanitizer. Can a player wear a face shield? Our guidance from the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory Committee basically says that the wearing of plastic shields is not allowed for practices and contests. Basically, it's an increased health hazard, and it would actually create probably more danger than it would help. Do players need to wear their own batting helmets? Players should wear their own batting helmets as much as possible. Same thing with bats. We encourage players to use their own softball bat as much as possible. And just basically, obviously these are ideal situations, we know that there may be some sharing involved, and if they are, make sure that they're wiped down between uses. That's what we're asking there. Does a catcher need to provide their own equipment? If they have it, obviously we hope that they use their own catching equipment as much as possible. And again, make sure that it's cleaned after before each practice and after each practice, or before and after each game. How often does the softball need to be sanitized? Shared equipment, softball, such as softballs, again, sanitize it before and after each game. The bat, how much that needs to be sanitized. Guidelines from the public health coaches need to sanitize shared equipment before and after practice in each game. Same goes for the batting helmet. Before and after each practice and game, the catcher needs to sanitize their equipment before and after each game. How often should players, coaches, and umpires be using hand sanitizer? Really keeping their hands clean is one thing I guess we've kind of found that is really the most important aspect of this. So the National Federation's advising players use hand sanitizer before and after each at-bat. They put on hand sanitizer before going out to the field and after coming in from the field. So and again, we emphasize that avoid touching of the face throughout the game also is encouraged. Should water cups be available? Again, just as we talked about before, no shared drinking fountains, water stations, or coolers may be used. Players need to bring their own water and beverages, and no hoses, no sharing. Again, make sure you stay hydrated. That's obviously going to be important as the season progresses. How often should you use the maintenance equipment? Again, Department of Education, Public Health says that daily sanitation should be recommended. Same thing with should people be permitted in the public restroom? You have local facilities and policies should be used to determine procedures. How often should the dugout be cleaned? Daily sanitation will be recommended before and after each game. And again, this would be a good thing to consult with your maintenance people too, just to make sure you're on the same page with them and their plan. And if we're talking about this, kind of came up yesterday. If local and sports reporters request information for a story, are they permitted to attend? We don't want them attending practices right now. We're trying to want everyone to kind of get into a routine those first couple weeks of practice. So for everybody's best interest, we believe that the media should not attend practices. Facilities. Is the weight room allowed to be used for part of practices? Answer to that is no, weight room is not available for any student athlete currently. However, if you want to bring weight room equipment to be moved to the softball facility to be accessible to your softball players, that's fine. Again, remember to use to make sure to sanitize those products when they're done. Can a gym be used for practice if it rains? Yes, it can. If the softball field's unavailable, practice can be moved into the gym with the understanding again that social distancing will take place, and again, follow the Department of Ed guidelines for facility usage, cleaning, staffing, make sure all that is followed as well. If you have field turf, can that be used as a prep for game on a turf if it rains? And the answer to that is yes. Practice can be moved to school outdoor facilities. Again, make sure you practice your social distancing guidelines, and the facilities can be used at any time, not just due to inclement weather. So if you want to have your JV team go to another facility or the turf field, they can do that.
Jason, I just want to interject on a facility. We've had some questions about use of other facilities in your high school. Remember, facilities are closed. No other sports are in your facilities now. So this is not an opportunity for you to have free reign of every facility that your high school has, okay? So particularly inside. So we are allowing some limitations for your sport, but this is not free reign for you to use the indoor facilities at your whim, because we are restricting those due Department of Ed guidance for all the other sports. Hope that makes sense.
Lastly, protocol in case of inclement weather. Most likely you have an emergency plan already set up in place, you and your AD. So basically local policy dictates that the emergency plan recognizing guidelines and protocol from the Department of Ed. So you can use that indoor facility such as a gymnasium and auditorium. Obviously, if you're in the middle of a tornado, individual safety is, everyone's safety it takes precedence. So again, make sure you go over your local emergency plan to make sure that everybody's in sync with that as well.
So for umpires, this is what we've come up with for umpire protocol. At the pregame meeting is typically where the coaches and umpires meet for the first time. So we only would like the head coach from each team and either 2 or 3 umpires at the home plate meeting. The batter's boxes are good clues about the size. They're 3 foot by 7 foot. If you stay at the corners of all the batter's boxes, you should maintain your social distancing. The players are to remain in the dugout until this pregame meeting is over. And we'll have no handshakes. We'll tip your hat, or touch elbows or whatever you like to do, but no handshakes. During the game, the umpires were not going to handle game balls this year. The home team will provide the game balls, and a supply should be placed in each of the team dugouts. We're kind of recommending the home team provide 12 game balls. Each team, when they're playing defense, supplies the game balls to their pitcher. So typically, when you have an early morning game and the ball gets hit to the outfield and it gets wet from the grass, we roll it into the defensive team to clean it off before it goes back out into the game. This is going to be how we're going to handle it for the game balls. We're also recommending that the game balls be changed every half inning. So when your pitcher comes in, bring the game ball with them, and the other pitcher should bring a game ball out with them. Foul balls touched by anybody outside the fence should be returned to the defensive team for sanitizing prior to being put into play. Here's where coaches will be on the honor system to ensure the game balls are properly sanitized and suitable for play. So make sure there's no cuts on them. And it is recommended if the umpire feels the need to inspect the ball should be thrown to the catcher. Catcher can hold their arm straight out and let the umpire take a look at the game ball to see if it's suitable for the game. Coaches should report substitutions directly to the umpire and keep in mind the social distancing requirement of 6 feet. Coaches who wish to discuss a rule or a ruling on the field must maintain the 6 feet of physical or social distancing. As in before, we've encouraged umpires to not pick up team equipment. And this year it will be mandatory for them. They are not to pick up the team equipment, to get the bat out of the way or hand the catcher's mask back to the catcher. They're not to do that this year. Umpires typically go into the dugout to get a drink of water. They're going to be directed to bring their own water. So umpires will be directed to not go into the dugout. As far as the media box, we would recommend one person in the media box at a time due to the size of it. And you know, we're one of the first ones that's going to play this year, so the media is going to be there. So whoever is the on-site administrator should help with, you know, taking turns for people to go into the media box. As the players, the umpires will not chew on sunflower seeds and spit the sunflower seeds out. If the umpires get together because the coach asks them to talk about a call, they still must maintain a physical distance of 6 feet.
Kathy, let me, Tom, stay on that slide, please. While media is brought up, coaches, we have asked no media at practices, at least for the first 2 weeks. And the reason behind that is we are trying to limit who is at practices. We're not letting parents there. We don't want you to be distracted. We don't want them to show up in the middle of the practice and set up a camera. We don't know where they've been. We don't know what they're going to ask you to do. So at least through the first couple of weeks of practice, please, if the media contact you, say before or after on an individual basis, we just think it's important that what you're focusing on now is getting your practices up and running, getting your kids trained. So right now, no media at practices.
That would also go for umpires. Typically, umpires before the season starts would like to call a scrimmage or two so they can not go in cold turkey to a game. So the umpires are not allowed at your scrimmages either. Okay, as far as umpires, we're going to have them take wide berths around the players to leave the facility. We'll try to leave through the outfield if we can, but if that's not an option, we'll find a place to leave the field to, you know, stay away from the players. We're going to ask the umpires to wash and sanitize their hands immediately after the game. We're going to ask them to wipe down and sanitize their equipment as well as the players. Well, as like the players are going to wipe down their equipment. When they post game and talk about things that they did in the game, that they could do better, that they did well, you know, specific situations that come up in the game, they're going to be conducted from the 6 feet social distance. And we are also going to ask them to clean their uniforms prior to the next game, put a clean uniform on for each game. Some of the adaptations we've had to talk about this year with the droplets would be, and I know this is going to be tough and it's going to be a learning curve for everybody at the very beginning. Pitchers will not be allowed to put their hands to their mouths or blow into their hands prior to pitching the ball. We'll call this a no pitch. And you got to let the umpire declare that this is a dead ball. Any umpire can call this. So if the plate umpire is worried about substitutions and the base umpire sees the pitcher go to their mouths, the base umpire can also call that a dead pitch or a dead ball. The new ball will be thrown into play while the thrown out ball is sanitized. And the pitchers who put their hands to their mouths must also sanitize their hands before receiving a new ball. Pitchers will be allowed a reasonable amount of time to sanitize their hands at the umpire's discretion. So if they want to carry a little bottle of sanitizer in their back pocket, they may do so. If they want to go to the dugout, they may do so as well. Now this is a learning curve for them, so you know maybe it'll get better as the season goes along. Players will be allowed to wear face coverings. Plain or single color material is preferred, but it's not required. And the pitchers should not wear the optic yellow face coverings. That's consistent with the other uniform requirements that don't allow optic yellow on the pitcher. Other adaptations, the umpires for the varsity games will be a plate umpire located behind the catcher and a base umpire as normal. They may adjust their positioning to be deeper than normal for the comfort of both the umpires and the players. This adjustment should still allow the game to be called as it was intended. The non-varsity games should also have 2 umpires, one of which must be certified. And the plate umpire is required to work behind the catcher at a distance that will allow him or her to perform their duty correctly. One certified umpire for lower level games may be utilized with permission from the executive director, Gene Berger, and only for extenuating circumstances. Now, this particular umpire may position themselves behind the pitcher's mound or behind the plate as they are comfortable. We have already had a few umpires say that they're not comfortable umpiring games this year, and that's their choice. That's their personal choice. We support that. So this is in anticipation of a shortage. It doesn't appear that I've had that many umpires tell me that they're not going to work. Maybe 35 that I know of. There could be more out there that haven't contacted me, but we really don't anticipate a shortage, especially since there's no middle school games. I know a couple of school districts aren't having anything but varsity games. So I don't really think that we're going to have a shortage. Along with the adaptations, if an umpire is uncomfortable with a game situation, they may contact the on-site administrator to have them correct the situation. Now, they're not going to police in the dugouts. That's the coach's responsibility. I mean, they're going to have enough to do with watching the pitchers, putting their hands to their mouths, and things like that. So they'll just do the best they can. It is a learning curve for all of us. And this is kind of a little bit of a repeat, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. If the ball is touched by anyone other than the players on the field, it should be removed from the game, sanitized, and dried as the guidelines we already went over.
Next section deals with miscellaneous FAQs. And obviously with practices beginning Monday, this is something that had been asked. Can coaches have contact with pitchers, catchers before June 1? No, the first day of live contact practice is Monday, June 1. Virtual workouts can continue to be distributed, but no live contact with any players can occur prior to Monday, June 1. Postseason schedule, as if you've noted, regionals will begin on July 13 with the state meet in Fort Dodge, July 27 to July 31st. It is a week later. It has been moved back, the regionals and the state tournament. And I think as you guys probably been involved with your athletic directors, or at least communicating, they've been, athletic directors and conferences have been determining their schedules. First date of eligible games is June 15th. And as we know, different conferences, different schools are approaching the schedules differently. And it's really allowed locally and conferences to determine that. There will be no adaptations to the game or individual limitations. That will remain the same. You know, the question is, what happens if a school doesn't want to play another school on their receptive schedule as a result of a positive case or just not wanting to play them? And the key is, if the Department of Public Health advises either school not to be played, it's considered a no contest. If the individual school on their own chooses not to play the game would be considered a forfeit. Now, obviously, if it's considered no contest, it becomes a local on whether they want to reschedule it at another time or not. But in terms of if one chooses not to play without the Department of Health guidelines, the game would be considered a forfeit. You know, the question is, what levels are able to participate? And as we've seen around the state, different schools, different conferences are doing different things. The one thing we do know is middle school softball is not allowed. 8th graders can play in the high school teams as they have in the past. And local districts and conferences will make decisions on whether they're going to play varsity only or JV varsity or 9 JV varsity, or what they're going to do with that. Question has come up regarding inter-squad scrimmages. Inter-squad scrimmages are not allowed to begin on the first day of practice. Inter-squad scrimmages are considered practice, and you can have that up until June 15th. But once June 15th comes, then you could have scrimmages against other schools. So prior to June 15th, you may not have a scrimmage against another school, but you can have inter-squad beginning with your first day of practice.
Okay, so now we just have some things for other considerations that we want to talk about. If you have questions, you want to have some discussion, that's good. We've had questions about whether or not we're allowing tournaments, and we are allowing tournaments. But you know, as I start looking at state tournament and what we need to do just for Fort Dodge and multiple teams being there, there's some things you really need to think about, because remember, you're still hosting a tournament. You're still responsible for the social distancing of every team and every fan on every field. So do you want to consider things like limit the number of games, have a team play back to back? That's something. What are you going to do when the teams are not playing? If they play at noon and don't play again till 4, because you may not be allowed them at the park and have adequate social distancing. So that has to be talked about. You know, you're going to have to clean the dugouts in between. So do you want to think about how long your games will be? Do you want to reduce it from 90 to 75, like a drop dead time? It still has to be an official game, but you know, we're going to adjust game times at state because we are going to need more time between games to clean. So some of those things you need to think about for your multiple team tournaments. Consider your umpires when you have these tournaments. So they are not, you can have multiple team tournaments, but you will be expected to manage all of the requirements and guidelines, just like a home team, for every game. So think about what you're going to do for your tournament. You know, we've got a lot of things that we do in softball that make it such a great game for us. But we're going to have to think about what we can do to keep it great with some different procedures. So, you know, starting lineups, we're not going to come out and touch everybody, you know, 6 feet apart, right? So what are you going to do for your starting lineups? What's an alternate way to do your starting lineups for both teams that you could manage still following the social distancing guidelines? We don't come out of the dugouts anymore and jump all over everybody for home runs. What are we going to do to celebrate the home runs? No post-game handshakes. You know, we've talked about a nod, tipping your hat or visor to the other team, a wave. Be careful what finger people are putting up after a game too, please. How are you going to pick up bats? You know, we have ball girls, ball kids, those are good, but now they're not in the dugouts. We know umpires aren't going to pick them up. We know the opposing catcher isn't going to pick them up. So think about a procedure for getting your bats picked up. Return of foul balls. Who's going to do that? We do already have one. It's just if someone else touches it, and then, you know, sanitize it and get it back in. So think about it. High fives, fist bumps, hugs, cheering, singing. I bring this up because we find out the virus spreads further when there's loud cheering and singing. So it goes up to 12 feet. So we need to think about those things. It's not that I'm saying shut it down. I'm saying think about another way to go about that so that we can help with the safety of our kids. And please share. If somebody has a great idea, please share it. We'll be thinking about all of this for state softball as well and for regionals. So if you come up with something great, let us know. Postseason. Well, we're starting games on the 25th, and Kathy tells me she needs the brackets a week ahead so she can get the umpires assigned. She is so needy, I tell you what. We're going to have rankings. Jason's working on them now. But for you to expect that bracketing is going to be done the same way this year is not realistic, all right? We will attempt, but you know, it isn't really fair to think about the rankings the way we always have. First of all, some teams are playing only conference games. Some teams are just starting the schedule as of the 15th. And so we're not going to have the non-conference. We're not going to have all the breadth of opponents to judge how good everybody is. But we will look at it. We will think about it. But please, please, please do not expect it to be the same, okay? Obviously, there's going to be more geographical bracketing this year, okay? In the postseason, we may need doubleheaders. I'm sure there will be schools who don't want to host. You know, for one thing, you have to charge admission for regionals. And if you're not comfortable as a district to do that, that's fine. I understand that. So we may need doubleheaders, maybe umpire related in some parts of the state, but they may be necessary. Classifications, they're final. They're not final yet. We're waiting until the first week of practice in case we get some cooperative sharing. But if schools decide not to participate, we will not change the numbers. So 5A is the fewest, 40. If two schools say, whenever they tell us we're not playing, we'll bracket who's in that. We will not move up from 4A. If it gets, someone said, well, how low do you go? Well, if I get 8 teams in 5A, I'll thank you for saving us a few bucks and you'll all come to Fort Dodge, okay? In Fort Dodge, game times will be changed. We need increased time, okay? We're considering other changes, including more than 2 fields. If we get a lot of people and we cannot social distance on 2 fields, we may think about it, okay? Central has indicated that rooms will be available for us. There may be limits. For example, 2 to a room instead of 4 players. We may have some changes in terms of who can utilize those because of distance. We are also developing hotel rooms in case, but we think we have it covered. We think we will have housing options for you in Fort Dodge. Remember, we're a week later and RAGBRAI is not going through. So that comes to the end. We'll go to the questions.
And Jean, if you want, I can go ahead and just read the questions and then you can answer, or whoever can answer. And
okay, great.
Use your breath a little bit.
Yep.
The first one here that we were going to plan to answer live, it's the question is, are we in charge of sanitizing the girls' personal equipment, such as a fielding glove and batting gloves?
Well, you're in charge of making sure it's sanitized. Whether you personally do it or not, I don't know, but you're in charge of making sure all of the hygiene and the sanitation takes place.
The next question we have here is it possible to go into an auditorium or library or school facility where players can be distanced to watch video with our players?
No, school facilities are closed. Do it virtually. Do that virtually.
The next question we have here is, between innings, before and after games, are coaches allowed to have huddles with their players to discuss a new strategy or reflect on the game?
You have to social distance. So if you mean by a huddle where you're close, no. You have to figure out a way to do that without bringing everybody too close.
Our next question is, when social distancing during a game, can the players be along the field inside the fence during the game to keep room in the dugout, or do they have to be outside of the fence?
Outside the fence. If they're inside and the ball goes in there, we're in a dead ball situation. That baseball allows that by rule, we don't. So we would prefer it to be on the outside. If there is no other way for you to do it, call me.
This next question is related to masks. If someone is wearing a mask and they adjust their mask while on the field, is this considered the same as going to their mouth?
Kathy, what do you think?
I would say if they touch the earpiece, no. If they touch the front of the mask, yes.
Our next question is, can a pitcher have a damp towel in their belt to wipe dirt from their fingers, or should they have a dry hand on their pant leg?
Defensive players can have towels. Offensive players should not have towels hanging out of their pockets, because if they are tagged on that towel, then they're out. That's part of their uniform. So defensive players are encouraged to only be the ones to have towels.
Kathy, this might be a good time to talk about other drying methods for pitchers' fingers. What is permissible? Is that Gorilla Grip permissible by NFHS rules?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Powdered rosin is also, and it is encouraged if you have 3 pitchers that they each have their own rosin bag or Gorilla Grip.
I think that, again, if you're putting a picture of, she needs her fingers cleaned and dried. It's a feel thing. I understand it. And, you don't want her to lick them to get that. But you're also having her touch the towel and touch her pants, and whatever's on is going to be over and over again on that uniform and that towel that she's touching. So maybe explore some of these other ways. The Gorilla Grip seems to be something that works if they can get used to it.
This next question here is, can the overflow of players be inside the field along the foul line, or does it need to be outside the field of play? We've answered that question. It must be outside of the field of play. This next question is, can pregame introductions still occur?
Yes, you just have to figure it out so that you're following the social distancing in the dugout before they come out. Maybe you want to do, home team intros as they go to their position, right? Interview or introduce them as they go out. But lining up along the lines 6 feet apart, you're going to be all the way in the outfield. So yes, but remember the guidelines.
Our next question is related to batting cages. Their particular school has their batting cages inside the school. It is their only option for batting cages. Can we use these facilities as long as we practice social distancing?
Gary, maybe? You know that one, Gary?
Critical thing with that also is you have to make sure that there are people that are responsible for the sanitation and upkeep of them. But as long as that's part of your, if you want to call it regular baseball, softball facility, yes, you can use it, but you have to maintain social distancing, and you have to ensure that the sanitation has been done by your school or individuals.
Our next question is in relation to temperatures. If a player misses practice because she has a temperature but has no temperature the following day, is she allowed to practice or play? If she had a temperature for several days and recovers and tests negative for COVID-19, is she able to play immediately?
Your county public health department, we've encouraged the ADs to reach out to them now, and your county public health department will be issuing guidelines on that. We need to clarify, I think, Tom, at the baseball meeting, they said 72 hours fever-free, but I don't know if that means if they also had other symptoms or they just had a fever. If they just have a fever, and people get fevers for a lot of things, 24 hours is what we've been told. But so it kind of depends. If she's symptom-free and is only a fever, and there might be other reasons she has a fever. Girls have things like that. So check with your local county Department of Public Health guidelines that your AD is going to get on that.
And Jean, a follow-up to that, there was another question earlier about headache or another symptom that is a symptom of COVID-19, but if it's just maybe they're susceptible to headaches or they have a migraine condition, what is the protocol for that?
This is where you need to get with your school nurse and your kids or a medical person and find out what their pre-existing conditions are, okay? If a girl has a history of migraines and she has a headache, then you know. So it's very important to know what the medical history of your kids are for things like that. She has a headache and she doesn't come and it goes away and there are no other symptoms, Again, the Department of Public Health guidelines will give you that information, but go back to those pre-existing conditions and know if there are regularly occurring headaches for her.
There was a suggestion here regarding fevers. This person's athletic trainer said that the fever must go down without using fever reducers, such as a medication like Tylenol. Jean, can you confirm that?
Well, that's if they're exhibiting symptoms of COVID as well. I mean, that's a return if they have multiple symptoms. I don't know if they've just had a fever for 24 hours. But again, public health, check with your Department of Public Health guidelines on that.
We did have one question. I'm not too familiar with this product, but maybe someone else is. Can you clarify what specifically is a Gorilla Grip, or where they might be able to find some?
Well, I was going to say a gorilla, but that's not right. So Kathy?
A sporting goods store would have it, or everything is online now. It's called Gorilla Grip or Gorilla Glue. I think they're both the same thing. It's a tacky substance that's supposed to stay on the hands and not be transferred to the ball.
It just allows for a better grip, a better feel for the pitcher.
Yes.
All right, I'm looking through some other questions that are coming in here. The question was, if headaches are normal, can they still attend practice with a headache? We just covered that one. Check with your pre-existing conditions of your student athletes and school nurses and public health department. The next question that came in was, do offensive helmets have to match? Offensive helmets have to match.
No, I don't think they ever have. Isn't that right, Kathy?
That's true. They do not have to match. I think I answered a couple of different coaches' questions on that. They just can't be a shiny surface, and they have to be the NOC approved.
The next question here for the team is regarding team photos. What recommendations do the panelists have about how to conduct team photos?
Well, we've been advised that unless you can practice social distancing, no. But I think that that is one of those things that as we advance into it, you might get some additional guidance to. Yesterday, AD's suggestions were that you could take individual photos and Photoshop into a team photo, or somehow do your posters and some of your things with individual photos in a Photoshop. You know, I've reached out to our photographers for state because, you know, we do it at state as well. So I think there'll be further guidance coming out on team photos, you know, but if you can do it with some distancing so people aren't touching and stuff. But right now we've been advised that you have to practice social distancing.
Looking at a previous question from earlier in the webinar, it regarded the ACT test, which had been moved to July 18th. It might interfere with regional competition dates. What is the protocol for that, or what is being discussed regarding the ACT test?
Well, I'm not going to ask the ACT to move their date for our regionals. It's during the day, and we typically, I would think a test is during the day, and we typically play at night. But if we do have a conflict, we'll do the best to accommodate that with start time or something. Just let me know. But no, we won't be asking for the ACT date to be moved.
Unless I'm aware of some changes in the summer, they're typically done before noon.
The next question is related to quick stats and varsity bound. Do they need to send team info to Jason for rankings, et cetera? Talk a little bit about that.
I sure can. I can talk about that. Yeah, I put a prospectus online, a team info page on May 4th, I think it was. So that's up. And if you go to the coaches and administrators section of the softball website, you should be able to download that and get it back to me. I've gotten quite a few from everybody or from coaches, but I sure would love to get more. All information is read and looked at, trust me. And then I know there's a question about quick stats and varsity bound. I'll talk on that a little bit. They are ready. It's ready to go. One thing you will want to know, it is different. Varsity bound folks have revamped the varsity bound or the quick stats system. All the information plus some of the new things are there for you to look at. So if you get a chance to take a look at that and play around with it, I think you'll find you really like it. And I know one other aspect that I would certainly recommend to you to tell your fans, your parents, is get that Varsity Bound app. There is a lot of neat stuff on there in regards to, I don't think there probably will be a lot of programs printed this year, but you can look at matchups for the day and they'll have rosters for both teams on there. And it's a great resource. I highly, highly recommend that you let them know about the Varsity Bound app. It's a free app for fans to look at and view at games. I know I'm a roster guy. I like to look at rosters during a ball game, and this will help maybe with the absence of programs. So if you have any questions or problems with Varsity Bound, let me know. I'm in contact with those folks all the time. Also, if you're using iScore, I highly recommend that as well, because you can get a module to put your stats in automatically by using iScore. We use that at state softball as well, and it works really slick. So those are some things. If you need any guidance or help with that, drop me an email. I'll be more than happy to help you with it.
Thanks, Jason. We did have a clarification come in from the Gorilla Gold Grip product. Just to be clear, it is Gorilla Gold Grip Enhancer. That's the full title of it. It's more of like a powdery rosin. Gorilla Glue and Grip are completely different products altogether. Yes, the glue itself is like the strongest glue known to man, I feel like. So definitely it's the Gorilla Gold Grip Enhancer for those searching.
That's a really important distinction. No glue.
The next question is, how are visors classified for sanitizing purposes? Are they sprayed down after practice, or should they be laundered like the rest of the uniform?
Sorry, I missed the first part. What are we sanitizing, Tom?
Visors that are worn like hats.
I
Gary.
would treat it like a uniform.
The next question, if doing soft toss, do the balls need to be sanitized between each batter?
No, they don't have to be sanitized between each batter. The guidance says balls should be sanitized at least once daily, I think. But remember, the important thing about the balls, as Dr. Padati said to us, is what's on them gets on the hands. The hands are more important because that's what touches the face and that's what spreads the virus. So if you don't have to sanitize the balls over and over and over, but you do have to wash their hands and sanitize their hands over and over and over, because whatever is on the ball, they're picking up, whether it's on their glove or their hand. So the hands are much more important for frequent sanitizing than the balls. But it is the expectation that the balls and all the equipment are sanitized.
I think along with that is each time you come in from the field, it's not a bad idea right away to sanitize your hands and again, before you go out to the field.
Another comment about team photos, about green screens. I would recommend that if your photographers do have the ability to use green screens as backdrops and can do individual photos, this person, their team specifically, is doing individual photos with the green screen, and then they will use Photoshop to Photoshop everyone into a group photo setting. So that is an option. The next question is about a softball player that was a foreign exchange student to Italy this past year. She did return home early. Can she play at the varsity level on our team this summer?
Gary's my eligibility guy.
I would deem her as one of your students yet, and she'd be eligible to play.
Our next question is in regard to the playing of the national anthem. Should they still do this at the beginning of the game if they keep social distancing? And I'm going to add on this, what is the protocol for a live performer versus a recording? What is recommended?
You can still do an anthem. A live performer, well, are you going to have it on the field or in the press box or where? Because you're going to have to make sure that person is practicing all the requirements. Anything to add on that, Tom, and that you've heard about live performers?
I do know that the Athletic Association is going to check with Al Greiner from the Music Association on his recommendations. I do know from a music background myself that singing in general is probably something to reconsider at the time being until we know more, just because of the way droplets are sprayed. So I would recommend a recording if at all possible. But so anthems are still allowed.
Yeah, but maybe given after I listened to what Tom had to say, and that more advice is coming from the Music Association, and I know that droplets go further when singing, maybe you should avoid live performances.
Jason, a question for you regarding Varsity Bound and Quick Stats. This question regarding the Varsity Bound app. Can you upload directly to Quick Stats using the app?
Yes, the little secret to Varsity Bound and Quick Stats is it's one and the same. So if you're updating on Varsity Bound, if whether you're updating through the app or whether you're doing it on your desktop, it automatically goes to the Quick Stats website. It's all the same information. So you're not knowing if you're putting it in one, it's going to the other. So there's no short answer to that question is yes.
The next question is related to photos. When can you allow photos if outside individuals are not allowed to practice?
Well, like I said, if you could wait till June 15th, I think we'll have more guidance on that. I guess you could set up something individually outside practice. Gary, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would agree. If you're going to do it after practice, it's not considered part of your practice. You just need to maintain social distancing, but you shouldn't have that during your practice time because we have not allowed that.
The next question is related to recommendations for sanitizing fielding gloves. What products will work that will not ruin the leather? Is there a spray that or a liquid that might be preferred for the leather of the glove as opposed to something else?
I do not have any knowledge on that one. I mean, we've just been advised that the sanitizing spray and the wipes and everything must meet the CDC requirements so it kills the virus. Tom, was that question typed out?
Yes, yep, we
Okay.
will include it in the transcript and have
Yep.
a chance to review that.
Yeah, we'll review it and see if we can include it in the transcript.
This is a clarification question on which players are considered essential. Are all players considered essential players in the dugout or only those actively playing in the game? So who should be in the dugout versus who should be in the behind the dugout situation?
Who asked this question? Because I have a couple of suspicions about coaches who want as many players in the dugout, and I always fight with them on this. Well, here's the deal. It's up to you to decide who's essential, right? We're not going to say 25 players. But when you have to think about social distancing the people in the dugout and keeping them safe, I think common sense would tell us that only the players who have a realistic expectation of playing should be there. If you have other players like your JV or something and you have the ability to social distance them in the bleachers that are close by or something, I get that. But the expectation of the dugouts are the people who are going to play. And I realize you don't know that. You may have somebody you think's just going to be a pinch runner or a pinch hitter and you don't know. But use your judgment and some common sense. The more people in there, the more you have to worry about sanitizing, hygiene, distancing, keeping them away. I'm going to keep saying this over and over. This is the summer of being a mom, right? This is the summer you get to say, don't touch your face. Don't stand next to her. Quit touching her. Go wash your hands. Stop that. To keep them safe. So the more you have in the dugout, the more you got to worry about. So Gary, any other advice as an AD? I kind of went off on that one.
I think obviously you want everybody to be important and be part of it and around it, but I agree with Jean that the less you have to, worry about these other things, the more you can worry about coaching and those important things. So you can still keep them around it, but have them in those alternate areas that we talk about. You want to, again, we're all learning and we're all new with this, and you sure don't want to do anything to jeopardize anybody.
Our next question is related to cooling towels. Are cooling towels permissible in dugouts or to be used on the bus?
We are looking at towels for trainers' use for heat stroke, and we'll have that guidance put out. But any towel that you have has to be used by only one person.
I believe during the baseball meeting this morning, they also mentioned, yes, it has to be that individual's personally provided towel.
Yes. But
I think that,
go ahead,
Jean.
Gary. No, go ahead.
So that leads into, I know I just got an email from somebody asking about shared coolers. And again, where you used to have one big cooler and you'd have all kinds of water or Gatorade in it for them to do it, that is not acceptable. They all need to bring their own cooler with their own bottled water or Gatorade or what they have. And again, if towels are allowed, it would have to be in that one by themselves and not used by anyone else.
Our next, just a clarification on the visor. Is there anything wrong with sanitizing it versus washing it like a uniform, or is either an option?
Either is an option. Don't share the visors.
This next question is related to calling signs for coaches. Are coaches allowed to touch their face while calling signs?
I knew this was going to come up. Well, given that we have been given guidance that the virus is transmitted most rapidly and most frequently by when people have it on their hands and touch their face, I will leave it to you to decide as your own personal responsibility.
And it looks like our last question in here is probably for Jason. Can you upload from iScore to QuickStats? If so, how can that be done?
You can do that. Basically what you need to do is get a hold of the folks at Varsity Bound. What they do is they will put together a add-on, basically what it amounts to. And you need to contact Sam Schill and his email. I have his email address. It's sam@varsitybound.com. Send me an email though too, and I can make sure that I can get you in touch with him, and so you can get that information, because there is a little bit of a technique that needs to be put, or an app to be put in on with your iScore.
Thanks, Jason. We did have another question come in, and just so everyone's aware, we do have about 5 minutes left until our 90-minute limit here, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. This next question is, will umpires provide extra time for coaches to get pinch runners, etc., who might not be in that dugout?
Yes, they will.
Next question is a clarification on busing. Do kids have to sit zigzag seating, or is one person per seat? What's the specific guidelines on that?
As you remember what the guidelines, they said, ideally, if you have a 77 passenger with 13 kids, you sit alternate seats on each side by yourself. But again, that's a guideline. So if you can't do that, then that's where they talked about wearing face masks, sitting with siblings, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a required, it becomes you determining in your mind what you're capable of doing. I would definitely visit with your administration and what you guys all feel comfortable with on that.
Thanks, Gary. It appears that there are no other questions. Oh, sorry, this is the last one. We'll call this the last one. It just popped in. On the guidelines, it talks about a family member with symptoms. If a family member has any of the listed symptoms, can the players attend practices and games?
Check with your local Department of Public Health. I was advised by Dr. Padati that they are going to have some questions for that individual to ask, so they can determine what to do. Some of those are very, very individualized. For example, if your mother is a nurse and works in a long-term care facility and there's an outbreak, what do you do? What do you do if, we don't know if the nurse was wearing PPE. We don't know if she's been tested and it's positive. So those are there's some things with tracing and contact questions that the Department of Public Health will advise. So contact your public health on those.
And Jason, one final question for you regarding iScore and Varsity Bound. What is the cost of those applications?
Both of those apps are free. The only expense you might incur is if you buy the module to import your iScore stats into Quick Stats. I do believe they do charge a maintenance fee for that. And again, that's something that I can get that information for you, Mike. If you send me an email, I can definitely get that information of what they charge. I don't know exactly what it is, but yeah, that'd be the only expense you would incur. Both apps are free.
All right, panelists, are there any other questions that you might see? I'm not seeing anything at this time.
Can we go over game ball protocol again? Okay, so each dugout has game balls. And when you are in the field, you are responsible for giving your players game balls. Kathy, jump in at any time. So when they're returned to you, when the game balls are returned to you in your dugout, sanitize them, especially if someone else has touched them out, in the foul ball area, check them over, but your game balls should go to your players. Anything else, Kathy?
No, there needs to be an adequate supply of game balls since there's going to be some in each dugout this year. So we were suggesting like 12 game balls, so 6 in one dugout and 6 in the other. And we'll just have to work together and coaches be on the honor system to put in game balls that are adequate for play.
And remember,
go ahead, Jean.
Remember, it's the hands. It's not as much as what's on the balls as sanitizing your hands. So if you're wiping down the balls and you're sanitizing hands, I think the NFHS had when you come in, when you go out, all that. So remember the hands as well as the balls.
All right, I'm going to close it off on this last question that I saw come in. If their track is by the softball field, are people allowed to be on it?
How close is it? And Gary, any thoughts on that? I mean,
what is the concern, or what is the?
I would imagine that it's regarding either a practice or a game. If it's too close, like if it's during practice, can someone be on the track? And then during a game, could someone be on the track?
I'm not sure what they're looking for on this. Maybe they can clarify it.
I would say, and Mr. Keating mentioned this in yesterday's, if the track is 200 yards away, don't worry about policing that. If they're not directly concerned with your facility at that given time, don't feel like you need to police it. If it becomes an issue, then take appropriate action.
But again, you as the coach shouldn't have to worry about anything anyway. It should be the administrator in charge that makes that decision.
Well, we have hit noon here on my clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll continue to look at the questions that were posed and consolidate them into a transcript and provide that to all the attendees of today's webinar later today, along with a recording of this webinar. I would like to thank our panelists, Executive Director of the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, Jean Berger, Associate Director Gary Ross, Assistant Director Jason Esslinger, and Coordinator of Softball Officials Kathy Creighton. And thank you all for attending today. We hope that we provided sufficient information for you as we start what is going to be a great season here of summer softball. As always, thank you for all that you do for our student athletes, our teams, and our communities. Wishing you all the best. Take care and stay well.